All right, let's talk about the elephant in the room. I'm a personal trainer, have been for over 20 years, and I'm fat and out of shape. So, why am I even talking about that? Well, for starters, I think there needs to be some level of authenticity. I think that the a personal trainer doesn't necessarily need to have a ripped six pack all the time, but they need to train. They need to be in the field, get under the bar, so to speak, and quite frankly, that's been a struggle for me for a few years. To this video, we're going to talk about how I got there. I'm not going to necessarily beat it up because nobody wants to hear sob stories, but I'm going to talk about my plan for how to get back in the groove, how to get back in shape, and how to get into eventually the best shape of my life. But that's obviously going to be a little bit down the road. Uh, Basically, I've been kicking around the idea of this video series for a while. Um, even before I started back up here on YouTube, and kicking around the idea, and I thought it was a good idea. I just kind of didn't want to do it because nobody likes airing their dirty laundry out there. It's just is what it is. But that being said, um, I knew it was going to come to this, but I got like a couple of troll comments on a couple of my past videos, and basically calling me fat. Um, and those don't feel good. But that being said, they're not wrong. I am fat. I am out of shape. So my days of arguing on the internet with people are long since over. I've been a veteran of the forum wars, so to speak, for the past 20 years, and I just don't have it in me to argue on the internet. But that being said, I thought that that was possibly a good impetus for me to kind of share, the inner working, so to speak, of exactly how I would coach myself as a client and show you guys the plan. So this is going to be an ongoing series. I'm calling it Project Cobbler's Kid, for the old line about how the cobbler's kid never has shoes. And we're going to basically talk about every week. I think probably on Tuesdays, but I'll settle on that. I'm basically going to have a weekly update where I'm going to talk about what I did, how it's going, progress, but also the why. So for those of you that want to kind of nerd out a little bit, I probably won't get into like ridiculous deep science, but it'll be a good chance to nerd out. So, how did I get here? And for those of you that don't know, my name's Isaac. For starters, welcome. But I've owned Relentless Strength Training for coming up on 14 years now, and I've been a personal trainer in some way, shape, or form for over 20, ever since graduate school. And in that time, I've worked with thousands of people, ages 7 to 99, but a lot of them were athletes and a lot of them were former athletes who wanted to kind of get that fire and that feel back and get back in shape, and I'm kind of in that category. So, I'm 44 and I just want to feel strong and fit and athletic again. And it's been a few years since I have. But basically, you know, what happened? Well, running a business is a lot. And I basically took the eye off the ball of myself physically and put my eye on the business entirely. And so I just, you know, ran the business to the point of burnout, which is actually primarily one of the reasons why I got rid of my physical gym a couple years ago, and work now online. But reached burnout, had some relationship stuff going on, which is long since resolved now, and had a couple of major injuries. We'll talk about injuries here in a little bit. Um, but basically, I got out of the groove, right? And every time I would try to get back in the groove, I'd end up getting hurt again. And that's one of those things that trainers don't talk about enough, I think, is how demoralizing chronic pain is. You know, joint pain, or and then in my case, it was joint pain injuries. But somebody that has like an autoimmune issue or something like that, right? Which thankfully is not an issue for me. But pain just kind of wears you down, and you eventually stop feeling like you can do anything. And once that happens, it's pretty quick and easy to slide into a depression. Um, and again, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not going to talk about clinical depression, chemically related depression, but it's pretty easy just kind of get stuck in, what I like to call comfortable misery, right? Where you have like your creature comforts. You have enough food to eat, you have enough shelter, you have enough whatever of your basic human needs. And so as a result, it's easy to just string days together, and it's easy to just kind of keep going, even though you're miserable, you're unhappy, your health is taking a slide, all that type of stuff. And I see this all the time with my clients, right? This is the type of thing that my clients come to me with, where they just want to be different. They want to be better. They want to improve. And I'm very, very, very good at coaching people out of that. I'm very good at getting people to that next stage where they're actually making forward progress and momentum. All the while, I was suffering from it myself, right? And I think to some degree, this is maybe one of the reasons why have been so good at helping people with it, because I can see it, because I live it and feel it. That being said, it's not something I want to live and feel anymore, right? So a few weeks ago, I committed myself to getting back in shape, right? And it's going well. We'll talk about it. But I thought that maybe this would be a good opportunity to share what it's like for somebody that has kind of a foot in both worlds, right? As a fitness professional and um, as a headspace guy, you know, I know how to work with a lot of this stuff. But as somebody that's going through at the same time, I also know how hard it is to actually get through it and do it, right? So anyway, this video series is going to be me eating my own dog food. And I'm going to invite you to come along for the ride. So welcome aboard. And like I said, every week we're going to hit into one of these videos, but today I'm going to kind of go through the whole breakdown. I'm going to talk a little bit about my background, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how to, excuse me while I mess with my notes here. You know what? We're just going to do this. There we go. I'm going to talk about my background, and then going to talk about my actual plan moving forward. And we're going to kind of nerd out on that a little bit. So for starters, my background, I talked about a little bit, but former athlete, primarily power athlete, football, wrestling, and some rugby in there. And I've always been a big guy, right? I probably always will be a big guy, and I'm not throwing any genetic whatever onto it, but just like I come from a big family, we're big people, we eat big, all that type of stuff. So that's like kind of one of those things that from a history perspective, I need to keep in mind, right? It's not a chain. It's not keeping me this way by any means, but it's a tendency I need to be aware of, right? And, I've been as light as as an adult, as about 225. Was pretty lean at 225, could see my abs. And then as heavy as about 325, recovering from some injuries. And right now I'm sitting at just a little over 300. So that's obviously got to come down. And that's kind of the background there. Again, I've owned a gym, been a personal trainer for 20 years, and dealt with periods of stress, depression, some bouts with alcohol throughout the course of my life. That is basically worked through the alcohol thing for like five years now. But as far as, you know, that burnout, that stuff like that, I'm pretty much good with it. But it took me a lot longer than I thought it would. So, and then the other big thing that I've got to be aware of when I'm looking, if I was looking at myself as a client, is I have a pretty major injury history from the lifting world, from combat sports, from physical, field sports, that type of thing. Um, if you've got it, I've pretty well broken it, except, knock on wood, except my knees. My knees are pretty good, surprisingly, right? But basically, when it comes to injuries for this plan that I'm on, I've got to keep in mind that I've damaged both my shoulders, uh, got a lower back issue that I've damaged. You know, all these things I can still do pretty much everything. It's just stuff I got to be aware of, and I need probably on the sooner side versus the later side. I need one of my hips replaced. Again, doesn't really stop me from doing stuff. Doesn't really bother me, for the most part. But it's one of those things where if I'm not careful, it does, and it affects my squatting. So we'll talk about that later. But that's kind of the background. And I've just basically allowed myself to slide for the past few years. And I'm sick of it and I'm done with it. So the first thing I do with one of my clients is we talk about like what's the big vision? Like where do we want to be? You know? And in my case, I've always been somebody, even as a kid, I mean, I liked big superheroes, right? And maybe that's because I could see myself getting there. Maybe I wanted to be there, or pick your pop psychology thing with it. But, I don't want to be tiny, and I'm realistically, I'm never going to be tiny. Like I said, I'm a big guy, but I know that my brain is going to want to fight as I get smaller, even though I'll feel better and I'll look better. I know that my brain's going to want to start to fight me on that. So I need to start to make peace with myself being smaller, you know. Um, I want to have healthy joints, as obviously much as I can with the past damage done. But a lot of that stuff I can rehab. So I want to get that. And I want to, above all things, I want to be more capable. Like right now, there's a lot of stuff I can't do. Like I'm still very strong, even after the last few years, I'm not training nearly as much as I should. Um, I'm still a very big, strong person, but I'm not capable. Like I would, I could probably run a mile, but run would be like one of those like charitable terms. You know what I mean? And that's not okay. Um, I don't feel comfortable going and hiking big mountains and doing like those types of outdoor fun things I like to do. I like to be in the woods. I like fishing. I like hunting. I like doing those things. And, you know, I can do those things, but not nearly to the degree that I feel like I should. Like, and I think as a man, there's this internal like capability meter, so to speak. And right now, I don't feel like my capability is where it should be. So that's kind of, those are all very vague things. Um, and just for that matter, just the vanity of looks. Like I don't look good. I don't feel like I look good. So I don't feel like I look in shape. And as somebody that does what I do for a living, you know, that makes me feel inauthentic. It makes me feel like I'm being a hypocrite, that I'm prescribing all these things for clients and they're working, and yet I'm not doing them myself. And that sucks, right? That feeling is just not a good feeling. And to wake up every day and feel that sucks. So I need to change it. So that's the big vision, right? And big visions are always going to be pretty nebulous. They're always going to be a little bit on the vague side because they're either so far in the future, or they're so big, that you can't really fill in the specifics. So that means that in order to really like set your brain on that, you need to start to fill in the specifics. And, the human brain doesn't do well with vagueness. It's a programmed machine Your subconscious moves you in the direction that you want it to go in, but it needs to know what that is, and it needs to be pretty concrete. And ideally, it's something you can envision, and you can envision with some emotion to it, because emotion's the language of the subconscious. If you just, this is like, just not to digress, but this is like where if somebody says, I want to make $1 million, cool, like that's concrete, that's great. But your brain doesn't get turned on by $1 million because your brain doesn't really know what that is. But if you can build like a very clear picture of what you're going to look like, feel like, have that type of thing, and get the emotion into it with that $1 million, your brain's go, oh, okay, I know how to do that. And it'll start to move you in the direction. So now we break into my 2-year goals, right? And 2 years is a long period of time. It's longer than I usually do with clients. Excuse me. But the goals I have, I just know they're probably going to be a couple year goals for all of them anyway. So, and it also is enough time to like give me some course correction time. I'm huge on course correction. As long as you're moving forward, you're making progress. And then you just need to shift your course as you move forward to eventually go where you want to go. But 2 years also gives you enough time to, really kind of lay in the groundworks versus like a hard, like 3-month goal, right? Which we'll get to. But in 3 months, there's only so much you can deviate. 2 years, it gives you that kind of space and that wiggle room. And by the end of a 2-year time, like, your goals may change. Like, I may find that some of the goals I set today, or I set 3 weeks ago, they may not really be where I want to be, but that gives me enough time to shift and move as I reevaluate, and we'll talk about that. But essentially, I don't know if I can share my screen. I'm still kind of learning StreamYard here. And I'm still trying to figure it out here. All right, so I don't know if you guys can see this well or not, but I think you can. So basically, my 2-year goals here, I have some strength goals, I have some fitness goals. And these are like, I want to make this abundantly clear. These are my goals. So they're goals that work for me. They excite me, because if your goals don't excite you, you're always going to struggle. And they're goals that kind of play into my past strengths and where I want to be. And they're based on my abilities and where I can go. So for some of you, you'll look at this and you'll be like, those are just a bunch of pussy goals, right? Others, you'll look at this and you'll be like, oh my God, that's so much. Don't care. This is for me. So, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give you an idea of how to set some goals that you can directly kind of target, So like I said, your goals are going to be yours. So for strength for me, in the realm of like the greatest powerlifters of all time, I'm not strong. In the realm of the average gym rat, I'm very strong. In the realm of the person that's never worked out in their life, I'm very, very strong. So for me, my goals are, I'm going to overhead press 225. I'm going to bench 405. I'm going to squat 500 if the hip holds out. We'll see. And I'm going to deadlift 600 pounds. Right. And for me, none of those are personal records except the bench. Most I ever benched was 385. But 405 is kind of like one of those bench numbers that people want to hit. And for me, I want to hit it. So none of these are PRs, but they're within the realm of getting close to some PRs. So they excite me because they're far enough off from where I'm at now that they'll get me back into it. And with those numbers, you know what, I'll consider myself pretty strong for somebody that doesn't really compete anymore, and you know is 44 years old and has a business and has a family and has the stuff like. So I don't need to be hitting like my 25 and 30-year-old personal records when lifting was my life. Um, I want lifting to serve me at this point, not the other way around. So anyway, those are my goals. And within 2 years, those are the ones I'm going to hit. Like I said, the squat one's a little negotiable. We'll sort of see where I go with that. So more in the fitness realm, and this is more uncharted territory for me. Um, you know, big part of this is getting into more endurance stuff. And that's not been something that I've done a bunch of in the past. I've gotten into rucking, which if you don't know, rucking is walking with a loaded pack, right? So for me, that works really well. It's easy on my joints, allows me to increase the challenge, like I would get from running or something like that, but without the stress on my joints. So, and again, as a big guy with some questionable joints, something I pay attention to. So it allows me to really push that endurance. Um, so I've done 15-mile rucks in the past, recently, and I'd like to do a 50. So the company Go Ruck has a 50-mile ruck, uh, sort of competitive. It's sort of like you're kind of pushing against yourself, but um, I'd like to do one of those 50-mile rucks in the next two years. And then I kind of want to get into running, not because I want to be a great runner, but I think that everybody should have like some low level ability to run. And I've programmed endurance athletes my entire career successfully, but I've personally never been much of a runner. I've been a power athlete. I sprint and get big and strong in the gym. So this is uncharted territory for me, like any sort of serious running training. Um, so I basically have some goals, and the goals are to basically just do it versus any sort of real numbers other than the mile time. Um, yeah, so basically it's just I set these goals just to kind of force myself to actually do the things, right? I have no illusions of becoming a great runner. Um, that being said, if maybe I fall in love with it, with some people seem to, hey, maybe we'll make a change over the course of the next couple of years. But right now, I want to run 6 5Ks in the next 2 years. So those are like competitive 5Ks. I certainly won't be competitive in the time, but just to kind of force myself to do it, because those are going to be goals. In doing those things are going to force myself to do the training, right? And that's a big thing to pay attention to, because you find that if you there's a term for it and it's escaping me, but basically a forcing function, rather, that's what it is. So basically, if you utilize part of your goals as a forcing function to achieve other goals, it's much easier to achieve those goals, right? So for me, showing up, scheduling, and doing 6 5Ks, 3 10Ks, and a half marathon in the next 2 years, that's a fair number of races, but I can space those out, and I can also, use those as something to mentally focus on for the next period of time, few months at a time, right? And if I don't do the requisite training for those things, they're going to suck and they're going to be way worse, right? So I've got to, by virtue of scheduling myself for these things, that's going to force me to do the training that I probably am not predisposed to do, the endurance running. It's going to force me to do that. So that being said, if I just went out and took a run today, I'd probably be fine. But if I did it 3 days in a row, 4 days in a row, what I'd find is pretty soon I'd start to break my feet, get shin splints, that type of thing. So I have a plan for building into that type of running, because at my size And when I deal with bigger clients, one of the worst things that big athletes can do, especially strong ones, because we put a lot of force into the ground and have a lot of weight combined, but we don't have the running technique, but B, the connective tissue that's toughened up from running, we get broken, right? So this is where you'd see a lot of bigger guys say like, "Hey, I'm going to go out and start going for a run." Well, it's not too long before they get broken. So I have a plan to kind of work into that, and we'll talk about it. But the short-term goals, I do things in 4-week cycles, right? I run my life in 4-week cycles. Same thing with my clients, and you know that allows you enough time to consistently move through things and start to see some results. But by being able to check in every 4 weeks on how your program is running, it also allows you to make course corrections. One of the big things in Relentless, one of our big techniques and our big core values is constantly being course correcting. And that doesn't mean constantly shifting and changing everything. It means making little adjustments to whatever you're doing because you move you towards your goal and hit your end result. So for me, the big thing here for kind of this first month is simply getting consistency back, right? Because I have enough of a history that I can get back in shape reasonably, not necessarily down to like the 240, 250 mark, but I can get back in shape just by doing stuff, right? So by virtue of just becoming consistent again, I'll move that ball, I'll get that ball rolling, right? So for me, consistency looks like 3 strength days a week and at least 2 energy system, which are, cardiovascular work days a week. So, and I have a little caveat to that, which we'll talk about in a second. But basically, that's what it's looking like. And now it gives me a couple of days to be a little more off. The next thing is to track my nutrition. Now, I'm not going to dig deep into any of these specifics on this video, but I'm not a fan of like strict calorie counting forever because A, as a lifestyle, it sucks. But B, there's just so much variability within that you kind of always end up chasing your tail. That said, when you're starting out and when you're getting back into it, like I am, tracking everything you're doing nutrition wise is absolutely vital because it gives you the hard data of what's going on. Because left to our own devices, we're all going to think, oh, well, I eat pretty well. And usually that's not the case. Because there's a reason why you're out of shape, and in my case, fat. I'm clearly not eating the way I should eat. So by tracking my nutrition, I can see where it is I'm breaking down. Where it is I'm not getting the nutrients I need, where it is I'm getting way too many nutrients. And I can see where there's gaps. But without that data, you really can't tell what's going on. So for me, initially, especially for this first month, we're tracking nutrition. Now, after that, kind of we'll see. Probably what tends to work best with my clients is to track hard for about a month, assuming things are stabilized. Maybe we don't track quite as hard for a little bit, and then we do kind of refreshers every few months. But we'll see where I end up. I'm not adverse to tracking for the long term, but I know that for most people, for a lifestyle, that sucks. They don't want to do it. Progress measurements twice a week, weight, waist, pictures, that type of thing. 3/4 of a gallon of water a day, more if I train. This for me isn't really a challenge. I tend to drink that anyway, but it keeps me hydrated. Tracking wins. I'll probably talk about this more in a bigger, longer video, but tracking wins is starting to teach the brain that you're winning, right? And when you're coming out of a situation where you don't want to be, when you're coming out of a situation of depression, when you're coming out of a situation where things haven't been going well, remember that your brain is mostly focused on keeping you alive, not thriving, alive. And that's what your brain's wired for. So your brain is wired to see the negative because negative is threat, you know. So everything your brain does is filtered through that negative, especially if you have been suffering some losses. Your brain's going to start to be more conservative. Your brain's going to say, "Hey, look, you know, the last couple things you tried didn't work. Let's back off and let's kind of sit on the couch and eat ice cream because that's exactly what the brain wants to keep you alive. You're safe, you're full, you've got a bunch of energy stored up. That's exactly what the brain wants. So if you're going to fight that, if you're going to come out of that conservative brain approach, you've got to give your brain the confidence that you can actually achieve something. And even if you say it with your chest, so to speak, you've got to actually believe it back here. You know, your brain's deep down got to believe it because you can say all the stuff you want, but if your brain doesn't think that you'll be successful, it's going to go, nah, that's going to find ways to sabotage you. So by counting wins, which is a technique from Brian Grasso and Kerry Campbell, Dax Moy talks about it as well. You know, it's one of the big things I do with clients right off the bat. You know, and again, I'm eating my own dog food here. You know, you start to pick little wins over the course of a day that you achieve, whatever they may be. And again, I'll probably do a video going more in depth down the road. But by taking these little wins and showing them to your brain, writing them down, as stupid and as like childish as that sounds, I always get like the big like guys that don't want to do it because it sounds like something woo woo or sounds like something a kid would do. What it's doing is it's training your brain that you actually are winning and you are succeeding. And so you start stacking those up, and before you know it, the brain's like, oh, all right, well, I'm predisposed to think negatively, but this guy's actually doing some wins. So maybe I can like loosen the energy purse strings a little bit. Maybe I can make like a little more um attack a bigger challenge a little bit because you know what? This guy's actually starting to prove a winning track record. So that's vital. And that's one of the things that I'm getting back into because when I don't do it, I feel worse. I feel better when I do. All right. So let's talk about my strengths and weaknesses, right? And I'll get off sharing for a little bit here. And we're back. There you go. So basically, when I make my plan, when I make my progress journey, so to speak, when I look at a client, I look at like where there's some of their strengths and weaknesses are, right? So in my case, I've got some favorable ones for me. You know, I have a long training history, right? And I've been doing this for a long time, both the coaching, but also the actual training. And for a large part of my life, I was very good at the lifting fitness portion of it. So I have a better than average connection to my muscles mentally. Like when I do a movement and I squeeze a muscle group, I know exactly where I'm targeting, right? And that seems to be kind of a not a big thing unless you don't have it, right? So I can get more out of every rep than somebody who's never worked out before, right? So over the course of workouts, that compounds. Um, you know, I have a history of being much more muscular, much more fit. So the body tends to kind of gravitate towards a certain place. So with that history, the body will start to remember, like, oh, and there's all kinds of reasons why, but the body will start to remember, oh, okay, well, yeah, we've been here before. And it's always easier to retread that ground. So I have that going for me. My training technique is very good. You know, my exercise technique is very good. I've been doing this for a long time. So there's that. You know, I've got advanced knowledge on all things exercise, physiology, the brain, that type of thing, working in my favor, right? It does lead to some overthinking if I'm not careful because I like to nerd out on stuff and then I get myself in trouble. But I know what I'm doing. All these things are big pluses that a lot of people don't have. That's why people hire coaches like me to do that stuff for them. Which, if you want to come along with me, you want to have hire me as your coach, then there'll be links in the description, all that good stuff. Get in touch with me. That's all going to work in my favor. I have schedule flexibility, right? I am a coach. I work from home. So I have the ability to move my schedule around. I'm very busy, which is one of the weaknesses here, but I can move stuff, right? And a lot of my clients aren't able to move stuff with flexibility. I sleep well. I've got a good sleep schedule. Um, Admittedly, I snore. Probably got the sleep apnea because of my size, but in general, I sleep well. I wake up feeling relatively refreshed. I have a pretty good schedule of when I sleep, that type of thing. My sleep hygiene as well, as far as the room darkness goes, stuff like that. So, um, sleep is huge for recovery, and that's a bonus. One of the first things I tend to have to work with clients on, a lot of them, is they don't sleep well. So I've already got that going for me. I understand how that works. If I was working with somebody, one of the first things we look at is their sleep. And so if you're concurring on a plan here with me and you're, thinking about getting yourself back in shape and all that good stuff, look at your sleep and make sure your sleep is as good as you can make it. And you may not go from like 5 hours of crappy sleep to 8 perfect hours in one night, but start to improve it a little bit each day. Access to what I need, right? So I have a great gym I can go to. I have stuff here at the house. I have a great space for walking, running, outdoor stuff. I have first world stuff. I have food. I have water. I have all that type of stuff. I have what I need to get myself in shape. And now you can get yourself in great shape in a bathroom if you have to. But it's nice to have the stuff. And I have the stuff. I don't have my own gym anymore, where I had all the toys I wanted. Well, I never have all the toys I wanted, but I have all the toys I needed for sure. But the gym I go to now is very, very nice, has very good stuff. So I'm not lacking in that type of thing. And I have a strong background in habit building. We haven't talked so much about habits in this video. We'll get into them in others. But I feel the cornerstone for a sustainable, successful journey is going to be your habits. And that's one of the things I work with clients exclusively, or or extensively rather. I'm not used to talking so much. Um, is working on building habits. So like one of the things I've done is I've done over 5 years straight every day of doing some sort of outdoor walking, pulling a sled, something like that, rucking, some sort of outdoor locomotion cardio. Sometimes it hasn't been much, sometimes it's been a lot, but for 5 years straight, which is like 1700 days, 1800 days, something like that, um, I've hit it every day. And, I live in Maine. So sometimes it's been a snowstorm. Sometimes it's been super hot and humid. Sometimes it's been, a downpour. But I've still been able to hit it every day. And that has taught me a lot about building habits and challenges. So now, because now, I don't think about it. It's just going to happen over the course of a day. I'm going to do it. That's been like one of my primary habit building exercises. So getting into the weaknesses, I've got to reestablish good habits, right? Like I've I've had habits lately that have not been great, as far as eating too much food that's not supportive, too much crap. Not being as on point with my schedule because I have the flexibility. So I've been kind of letting things shift around too much. And as a result, sometimes it's easier to push things off to the next day. And that's not useful. So, I've got to kind of start to reestablish some of those habits. and get myself back into it, as well as build the new habits of being back in the gym, that type of thing, and being consistent with those. That's a weakness. That's something I've got to overcome. My environment is huge, for starters. Like you are, because humans are social beings, we're heavily, heavily, heavily um, influenced by our environment, and by that could be the physical environment, could be the people we're around, could be internal environment too. That's kind of another thing. But your environment heavily influences your behavior. If, like, for example, chances are you don't talk the same way in front of your grandmother as you do in front of your boys, right? So that's not because you're a different person per se, but it's because your environment is different. And you don't even really think about it most of the time that I need to speak differently in front of grandma. You just sort of automatically do it. It changes your behavior. So my environment is wonderfully supportive in the sense of, my girlfriend is wonderful, that type of thing. But nutrition wise, not so much. Like, she likes to eat junk food. She has a teenage daughter who likes to eat junk food. Um, Not so much on the high levels of physical activity, that type of thing. So as a result, if I'm not careful, it's easy for me to fall into that, which is what's been happening. So I need to be aware of that. I need to move through it. I need to have strategies to mitigate around that, and we'll probably talk about that in future videos. Injury history. I'm jacked up. I got all kinds of injuries. Most of them are pretty good now, but it's something I need to be aware of as I'm building my plans, as I'm working through my plans. I had a history of getting hurt, coming back too fast, getting hurt again. We talked about at the beginning of the video, over and over and over again, and how demoralizing that can be. So I need to preemptively be focusing on keeping those injuries rehabbed, as well as being aware of them a little bit earlier. Like when I was in my 20s, I could just pound through them, right? Which is some reasons why I have them now. But I could just pound through those injuries. And now I know that I'm better off taking a down week or avoiding exercise for a week and not getting hurt and being able to then continue to train versus pushing myself to breaking and then being off and not able to do an exercise at all for an extended period of time. So something I have to be aware of. Busyness, stress in my life. Like, I'm a business owner. I got family stuff. In the past year, my father passed away. That was a big stress for me last year. And all the things that go with that and leading up to it. So that's passed. But that, like last year, that was a big deal, and that's one of the reasons why I put on so much weight is the stress, just the running back and forth to, his hospital, that type of thing. Anyway, but that's something that I need to be aware of as well, right? And it's a challenge. And for most of my clients, it's a challenge as well. We're all busy. We all have kids. We all have jobs. We all have like busy lives. And it's important to pay attention to that because there's only so much energy you can put into things. And if you're super stressed, then you're not going to recover as fast. You're not going to be able to put as much energy into training. You're not going to be able to do a lot of the things you want to do. So, in my case, I need to pay attention to stress, pay attention to stress management, and pay attention to keeping that under control so that I can still train hard, and diet, have my nutrition on point, that type of thing, and make those things as automatic as I can so they don't contribute to my stress. As a matter of fact, they should relieve me of stress. So, or should help relieve stress. So those are the weaknesses I've got to contend with. All right, the plan. So let's focus on the plan here real quick. And this is where I'll probably finish it up. So go back to sharing screen. All right, so the plan. Like I said, I do everything in 4-week phases. For this particular situation, I've started a couple weeks early. So I'm just going to do kind of one big phase at the beginning. It'll be about 5 weeks, 6 weeks. Um, but 4-week phases are useful. I use them for my clients. I use them for myself. And I use them in general for like business, for everything. I use 4-week phases because it gives you enough time to make some progress because you are consistent with what you're doing for the 4 weeks. But it also allows you time to evaluate after the 4 weeks and see if you're on the right track. And then if you need to do a little course correction somewhere, you can make a smaller shift to change direction versus like say going like 3 months, 4 months without like a reevaluation. And then next thing you know, you've been off track for all this time and it's not working. And you've got to make a big change to try to like recover. I'd rather make lots of little course corrections and continue moving forward at a high rate of velocity. So that's why we use 4-week phases. For me, the initial 2 phases are going to be GPP, which is general physical preparedness, basically fitness, getting used to moving again, getting the joints going, getting the cardiovascular conditioning up, becoming more athletic again through movement and bodybuilding. Um, and I'm using that term somewhat loosely in the sense of I'm not planning to get oiled up and get on stage, but just building muscle mass, getting the joints used to moving again, getting the connective tissue toughened up. So basically more higher rep work, doing a lot of body weight, doing a lot of dumbbells, kettlebells, that type of thing. Staying away from the barbells except for deadlifts for the next 8 weeks here, because my history with powerlifting, I know that once I get barbells in my hands, I'm going to start to want to just pile the weight on, and that's when I get hurt. I've been through this cycle several times. I know what I do when I give myself that opportunity. So I'm going to focus on getting the conditioning, getting back into gear before getting myself back under a bar. Even though my long-term goals are involving barbells, the deadlift, the bench press, stuff like that, I'm going to take some time and get back into condition before I jump into that barbell stuff because I don't trust myself, or maybe I do trust myself to do exactly the wrong thing. I've been doing a lot of walking and rucking. Been doing a lot of walking and rucking. Not as much of the rucking because I have a upper back wound that the pack doesn't sit well on, but doing a lot of walking. This basically is just getting my legs, my joints back into the sense of locomotion. It helps weight loss. Walking is great. Helps weight loss, helps stress reduction, helps toughen up the lower body. Because like I said earlier, if I jump right into running now, I'm just going to break something. Not useful. So the next 2 phases after that, obviously, as they get closer, we're going to map them out more carefully. But right now, they're probably going to include more specific strength work, probably still heavy on the GPP. But I'm probably going to start to introduce the barbell stuff back in and start training more. Still probably on that 3-day a week program as far as strength work goes. Possibly a fourth day if I really feel like I'm on fire with it, but we'll see. Schedule wise, we'll see. 3 days a week works really well for my schedule. And I can get everything I need done in 3 days a week of strength work, but we'll see. I may add more especially if I mentally start enjoying it, but I'm not going to let myself do that until I'm consistent at 3 days, because exactly what happens to everybody else is we jump into a big program, say, oh, I'm going to work out 5 days a week, blah, 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 because we're all fired up. And then come to find out that it's just too much for our schedule. And we end up missing days. And before you know it, we start feeling like crap about ourselves. And before you know it, we backslide into nothing. So I'd rather hit 3 good days consistently, get everything I need done, than overshoot initially and then fall back. So we're going to build up. And introducing some hill tempo work, which by that I just mean running hill sprints, but not really at a sprint, more like hill jogs up some steep hills we have in this area to get myself into the feel of running again. But that'll be less stress on the joints. Running uphill is less stressful on your joints. So just because of the mechanics involved. So I'm going to get back into the groove of running, get back into the movement, the feel, work on my running technique while, and running uphill's hard. So while continuing to build the cardiovascular system, but before I just go out and pound pavement, right? So those are the initial phases. Nutrition obviously will adjust as we get into it, that type of thing, mobility, that type of stuff. All that stuff I'll start to talk about in future videos. But get off the share screen here. There we go. So basically, that's where we're at. I'm a fat personal trainer. Congratulations, homie, that called me out on it. Way to go, bro. You're right. Time to stop. And I invite you to follow along with me. I invite you to take part in this journey with me. I will be talking about obviously my progress, my successes, my failures, but ultimately I want to give a behind the scenes look so that if you are on a journey yourself, this will give you some help on that journey. So with that in mind, that's what I got for today. Above all things, thank you for choosing to be relentless.